So, kind of want to connect two dots here. So, earlier you said basically the intersectional coalition is fracturing because their goals are not the same and their ideals are not aligned. Even though you try to jam them together, they're still not working. I feel like a lot of the right wing coalition has been able to maintain that coalition because they've been out of power. You know,
Hmm.
they had kind of a common enemy and that united them. But now you're starting to see some fragments, some schisms. You know, you've got the woke right, you've got classical liberals, libertarians, you know, conservative Christians, your neocons. You've got all these different groups who are just basically anti woke, anti Joe Biden. And now we have to figure out how to govern and what to do. And there's a lot more disagreement that was under the surface that we haven't realized up till now. So, what do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a real issue, but I also think that the debate that we've seen recently, like for example over the H-1B program, is productive, right? And it's the kind of thing that we really didn't see much of in the Democratic Party, where there was just this top-down consensus enforced on everyone. And the H-1B debate got acrimonious, right? Like a lot of people were way over the top. There were a lot of, just sort of very like, mask off racists or whatever. Elon also got very, very intense about the issue. But ultimately, where he ended up seems pretty reasonable to me, right? I'm a little bit of I'm an immigration hawk, even to some, and skeptical of a lot of the ways that the H-1B program is used. But where the sort of compromise ended up, I think will make most people very happy, right? Which is that Elon proposed doubling the salary floor for H-1Bs and adding a fee such that it essentially can never be cheaper to employ an H-1B holder in an American company than to employ an American. And so you would only bring them in if you can't find anyone with those skills, or if the people that you would bring in are legitimately more talented and will create more value for your business, right? So that just cutting out the fraud, right? Cutting out body shops like Cognizant, right? That will get the numbers way down. And like, I really think that like 20 or 30% of current H-1Bs are really doing the job that the H-1B program was meant to do. And you could double that and then get rid of the abuses, and it would be a net decrease in the total number, which will make the immigration hawks happy. But Elon can still get all his aerospace engineers that he needs. So you're right that there are a lot of differences, right? But I've been more impressed than disheartened by how those have been handled, right? And another example of this is, frankly, I think Trump is really good at bringing the coalition together, and the way he handled the abortion issue, I think. Uh, was great politically, right? So personally, I'm very pro-choice, right? Extremely, almost entirely pro-choice. Uh, Even in a lot of the circumstances that people find spooky, right? I don't care. It seems good. And just to make it sure that nobody can possibly be happy with this position, elective abortion, right? When you look at the statistics, is net eugenic currently, without anyone having to force anybody to do it, right? So yeah, big fan of abortion, right? But what Trump did was essentially kick it back to the states. It said very forcefully multiple times during the campaign, I would veto a national abortion ban, right? We're not going to do anything about this at the national level. I've taken it off the table as a national issue. It's not a thing going forward. And the thing about kicking it back to the states is that like it's not that hard, right, to travel to the next state over. And like the year after Roe was overturned, right, there was a slight increase in the total number of abortions. It like he gave the evangelicals like the big win they'd been asking for forever, and it has a very marginal, actual, like tangible impact on like the majority of people seeking these services. So I think that was great. That was like very smart politically, right? That was a great triangulation on that issue. And I think that the unifying goals of like, mass deportations of illegal immigrants, right? If you want to come here, you have to come here legally. And a pro-growth agenda, right? Increase energy production, cut regulation, right? Those things will deliver returns to people that are tangible in their daily lives, right? That aren't about ideology, right? They're not targeted at like the wildly disproportionate collection of ideologues of various brands that are on social media, right? They're targeted at regular people, and they'll have like a direct material impact on their quality of life. And I think that unifying around those basic issues, right? Like crime and prosperity and security, at the border and internationally, those things have broad enough appeal that I think any sort of factional disputes will remain primarily marginal.
I'm interested if you could comment a little bit on what I see as a decoupling between culture and economics, because it seems like for all of my life, you had Reagan, H.W., Clinton, and George W. Bush, where the basic philosophy was immigrants make us richer, therefore more immigration is better. And I've
Hmm.
heard a number of leading conservative voices, kind of your MAGA conservative, saying, I don't care if it makes us poorer. I want the immigrants out kind of mentality. I think it was Orrin McIntyre said something along the lines of, I don't care if avocados cost so much, I'll never buy one again. Like, I want my country back. And it's this fascinating thing of like, they're not making the economic argument anymore. They're saying like, the culture of my country is more important than economic growth. And I'm wondering like what you think of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are a few angles to take here. Like one, it is definitely not the case that like all immigration all the time is a net economic positive, right? You can look at the case of Canada, right, where they just had something crazy, like 20 or 30% of people living in Canada today are foreign born. That's insane, right? That's crazy. Their economy is doing terribly, right? Housing prices are through the roof. Per capita GDP has basically been completely stagnant since Trudeau took office. It's funny if you look at annual per capita GDP growth between comparing the U.S. and Canada. There's like a very noticeable moment when Trudeau takes office that they decouple, right? They were basically the same, and then it just Canada goes flat essentially, right? And like the same, you see something similar in Europe, right? The argument is that like, oh, Europe has an aging population and they have all these like expensive pensions and welfare policies, so we need to bring in, new young people to prop up these pension benefits to pay into the system so we can take care of the old people. And then you find that like, especially non-Western immigrants to Europe consume public services at a vastly disproportionate rate, right? They're much more likely to be on welfare. They're much less likely to be employed, and when they are employed, it's in lower income professions. So it's making the problem it was, supposedly meant to solve much worse. So that's the first thing is that like, you know, even if immigration pretty much always grows total GDP, it definitely does not always grow GDP per capita. And then the other issue, to more directly address what you said, is that like there are things that people care about that aren't money, right? There are sort of, I don't want to call them intangibles because they're very tangible, but things that are harder to quantify, but that nonetheless dictate a tremendous amount of people's quality of life, right? Social trust is a real thing. Like the extent to which communities feel like communities rather than, just sort of like boarding houses or economic zones, right? That really matters to people, right? Crime really matters to people, right? Even if, your individual chance of being victimized by crime is pretty low, if you live in a really dense city, maybe the per capita crime rates aren't that high, but if you see crime and disorder everywhere you go, that has a significant impact on your quality of life. So there have been studies that have been done on this. I'm not certainly not for the United States. I'm not any kind of ethno nationalist, right? I think America is innate, is sort of fundamentally a melting pot, and at this point, it's ludicrous to think that it could ever be any kind of ethno state again, right? As we're like 55% white or something. Like, what are you gonna do? But it is the case that like generally ethnic diversity lowers social trust, right? People vote less, people volunteer less when they live in highly multiracial communities. And like again, that doesn't lead me to think that we should have no ethnic diversity in the country, but it matters, right? It's something that has to get put on the scale. And like the way that it's been sort of bullied out of the conversation was never based on any kind of factual refutation. It was just like, how dare you? You're not allowed to say that, right? So yeah, I do think that people want to hear people want to hear their same language everywhere, right? They don't want to have to learn Spanish to order McDonald's or something, right? So yeah, I do think that culture matters, right? And also, culture matters because people vote, right? If you bring somebody in, even if they're a net positive, if they're going to, vote for policies that will be detrimental in the long run, that's worth considering, right? When we're admitting a new citizen, we're admitting a new voter. So, they're not just a unit of productivity, they're someone who's going to have a say in the future direction of the country. So yes, I do think, certainly I'm nowhere near as far in this direction, as a lot of people, probably not as far as Aaron, Definitely not as far as somebody like, Jared Taylor. But some of the things that they talk about are legitimate and they need to be part of the conversation. They need to go in the cost benefit analysis. And refusing to do this doesn't make that go away, right? It only drives, it ensures that these concerns are only addressed by the most extreme voices proposing the most extreme solutions. So, in the same, essentially, I see, sort of leftist and to a large extent even liberal, sort of refusal to engage with these issues as essentially they're creating the fascists that they've been, screeching about for decades at this point, right? Because people have real concerns, right? People care about these things. You can say they shouldn't care about them, right? You can say it's illegitimate to care about them, but they do. And the fact is we live in a democracy, so you have to address those things. And if you don't address them, you leave it to, the most extreme people who might genuinely be, fascists or neo-Nazis to address them. So I don't think that's a road we want to go down. So I think that we need to be able to publicly discuss things like culture fit. We need to be able to discuss things like social trust and crime without stigmatizing anyone who brings these things up.